They call us fat, we call them poor. They say our cities are trash, and we ask them why they have no air conditioning. America and Europe have something of a familial relationship where we tease one another about our shortcomings, but it is all love at the end of the day. However, one particular obsession of the American media is this idea that Europe is dying. It's so over for the Euro bros. But Europe is a diverse continent. While the EU has tied very disparate economies and cultures to one another, and geopolitical tensions have culminated in widespread energy issues, each country within Europe is facing its own unique set of challenges. Today, I want to talk about Spain, one of my favorite countries in Europe to visit and enjoy, but one facing a particularly dire youth unemployment problem, as well as high-profile tax evasion cases, passionate protests against tourism, a housing crisis, a secessionist movement, and most recently, a power blackout that had smug Americans online laughing at these so-called Euro poors. For Americans, Spain conjures up images of matadors, ornate cathedrals, old-world expeditions, and lazy afternoons spent drinking cervezas at street cafes. But the gap between our perceptions of Spain and what Spain actually offers its youth is widening, and not in a good direction. Is Spain becoming a country for everyone else except young Spaniards? And why has the country had a uniquely difficult time in recent years? Hey everyone, my name is Maggie and welcome back to Undoctrination. I hope you guys had a wonderful week. I know I did. I had the opportunity to fly out to LA to film an episode for Jubilee, which was an amazing experience. I have so many fun videos planned for you as we all try to get into this weekly schedule. I'm crossing my fingers because a lot of research and editing goes into these videos. So we really appreciate your comments and shares and amazing feedback. Anyways, enough about me. Let's talk about Spain. Last week, a power blackout affected over 60 million people throughout Spain, Portugal, and neighboring countries, which sent politicians into a panic and young Spaniards into the streets. As of writing this video, we don't know exactly what happened with the blackout, but the opposition movement to Spain's socialist-controlled government is blaming their abandonment of nuclear energy for less reliable sources like wind and solar. And as I mentioned earlier, this comes at a time when most of Europe's energy has been affected by geopolitical decisions made in light of the war in Ukraine. But power outages are not the only reason Spain is in the news. This picture went viral on X around the same time, goading Americans and Europeans into an epic, week-long trash-talking session, culminating in this incredible final form of the meme. The main points of contention were that American cities lack life and culture and walkability, and that can be a fairly accurate criticism. It's one reason Americans flock to countries like Spain for vacation to enjoy the beauty of life over there. But, as many Americans pointed out, we have jobs, and many Spaniards do not. Spain has the highest rate of youth unemployment in the European Union. And while it's recovered as others have from its recent high of 41.9% in 2020, it still sits north of 25%. For context, America's youth unemployment rate is 9.4%. And it's not that Spanish people are lazy or entitled or undereducated. In fact, Spanish youth tend to be overqualified. But the country has very different employment laws and systems, which have disenfranchised young people for many years. Spain has designed a system of labor regulations to protect workers from layoffs, or at least soften the blow. These mandate that employers have to pay 20 days' salary per year of service, up to an entire year's pay for any employee laid off or fired. That is an incredibly burdensome severance package for employers. Not to mention, employers are responsible for the majority of Social Security payments for employees, making the hiring and firing of employees incredibly taxing on businesses. The idea that Spain never really recovered from the 2008 global recession came up in nearly every paper I read on the subject. Around that time, laws were introduced which created a two-tier system of employment. There are long-term employees who enjoy an unprecedented amount of legal protection, and temporary workers, who are the first to get laid off should the economy experience a downturn. As it often does, the soaring unemployment rate of young people during COVID is reflective of how a disparate employment system created by employment protection regulations has created a crisis. Young people, as well as migrant workers, are more likely to accept these temporary positions as they have little competitive advantage in the market over more seasoned professionals. It's easier for an employer to justify the very high burden of hiring a new employee for a highly specialized, skilled professional, rather than for someone right out of college. But this leads to an ever-widening gap in skill acquisition. Temporary workers are less likely to receive professional development and training, as employers are not invested in their long-term success. So we see these cohorts of young professionals falling far behind their predecessors, even as they get older. So you may be asking, how does Spain fix this issue? If you're an economic interventionist and believe the state is capable of engineering ideal outcomes, you may think subsidizing or penalizing employers to bring on more permanent employees is the way. But unfortunately, penalties would continue to harm businesses' abilities to hire people altogether. And subsidies have shown to be less effective than the secret third option. Victoria Osuna found that removing or lessening burdens on employers, such as the extreme layoff package requirements, is far more effective than subsidizing the hiring of more permanent workers. Plus, you get the added benefit of not using even more tax dollars to fund the program. Spain already has a taxation problem, and it's harming the ability for businesses to establish or expand their capacity for employment. The Institute for Economic Studies placed Spain 34th out of 38 countries analyzed for fiscal competitiveness due to their dramatically increasing rate of taxation compared to economic growth. Businesses cannot thrive in this kind of environment, which means employment can't either. A country hostile to business owners is a country hostile to workers. And the socialist Spanish government's tendency to pursue the politics of control is also reflected in the housing market, which I think is really at the crux of the anti-tourism protests. Hear me out. In 2024, Spain saw an uproar of protests against tourism rip through the country, especially in cities like Barcelona and Madrid. The central argument of these protests is that Spain is full. There is no room at the end, babe. You're gonna have to camp out in the stable. They can't afford housing, and they claim the onslaught of tourists is what's pushing them out of the market. They feel that tourists are parasitic and that their government, as well as real estate owners, have left them behind. This is in spite of the fact that tourists are quite literally paying the bills. In 2023, tourism accounted for over 12% of the country's GDP and 70% of the country's post-COVID growth during that year. All of this rhetoric and energy, of course, is playing right into the hands of the socialists who are in power. And this government continues to launch initiatives that, on their face, would satisfy the desires of the protesters. For example, a 100% tax on foreign home buyers, rent controls in high-demand areas, and an ungodly amount of housing subsidies. In fact, Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has run to the media claiming that since he took office in 2018, resources dedicated to housing have increased eightfold. But has the issue been solved? No. Juan Lozano, a 24-year-old protester in Madrid, told the Associated Foreign Press in 2024, finding a place to rent has now become a minefield, especially for the young. There is hardly any supply, and when there is, the prices are sky high. It's almost as if the increasing interference of the government into Spain's housing market has created a chokehold on developers and real estate agents, creating a shortage. You don't lower prices and address these shortages by increasing complexity. You simply let builders build. In Economics in One Lesson, Henry Hazlitt discusses what makes a good economist and a bad one, and the same rules can apply to politicians. A good economist considers the unseen. What bad economists often overlook are the true consequences of their policies, namely, who is negatively affected and what the long-term outcomes are. Bad economists and politicians apply controls, taxes, and regulations to the most productive members of society, and they spend money that they often don't have to maintain power and the illusion that they are fixing problems. It's no coincidence that countries without overly burdensome severance requirements have better employment outcomes, and that places without harsh zoning and housing regulations have a healthier, cheaper real estate market. Ultimately, Spain will need to choose the path of greater economic freedom if they want to conquer the problems facing their youth. Spain could be one of the greatest places on earth to live if they could only get the government out of the people's way. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell notification. And if you want to see more videos like this, as well as documentaries and shows from like-minded creators, check out my friends at civil.com. Thank you to the Foundation for Economic Education for letting me work here. And I will see you all next week. Ciao!